Hello.
Hello.
Hello, people, Sample Genie community.
Good evening. Good afternoon. Good morning.
And all of that.
Wherever you are.
We are back with another tutorial
Back
for you
at
guys.
it again.
This time it's on drums. So we've been requested to talk to you about how we make our drums. So what we'll be going through is kicks, snares, percussion, creative mixing, engineering, making it all sound nice, and how it might sit in the mix.
Mixing the drums, like how that's arranged with buses, and then what processing goes on there, and then like more creative stuff on top of that, so reverbs and what we might use creatively to make it sound cool, and then in the context of tune.
Yeah, sounds about right. Yeah, so without further ado, we're going to get into it.
Let's get into it.
Yeah, we're going to start top down. So starting with the kick.
Yeah, so
well, should we let's play what it sounds like at the moment, so you guys know what we're working towards.
There's this super rough version of a tune that we've got. It's kick, snare, percussion, and bass, and some effects, just to show you how to know what we'd be working towards. So it sounds like this.
So yeah, so I mean, it's quite simple. I mean, it's bare bones of a track, but we're really focusing on the drums here. The bass is just kind of placement, just so we have something there. Starting with the kick. Here's the inserts at the bottom. So the way we used to do it was making everything a separate project, because it's nice to be able to drag a sample in and then use that. So it's like you've got a starting point, like drag it into a sampler and then start a tune from there. But because Bitwig's really good for using stuff in other projects, like dragging stuff in other projects, now we just started having the actual kick and snare in the actual project from scratch, and then that way it's easy, you can tailor it more to fit the actual tune each time, which is it's just much better. You just much more. You don't have to commit as early on to what the drums are going to sound like, because you never know what direction you're going to go with the tune. So to be able to,
it's annoying being stuck with a kick or a snare that kind of sounds a certain way, and then if you don't like it, you got to go back into the project and rejig it or whatever. So this is where we used kick 2, which you use for actually all of our kicks and snares at this point.
Yeah, we used to use Serum. It's a bit fiddly.
I don't know what people always use Serum, but I never seem to get a good sound out of it very easily. But I mean, it's just it's doing the same thing. It's literally it's just a pitch envelope, and there's nothing real fancy on there. There's no layers actually for this particular one anyway.
But kick 2, it's nice to have that visual element as well, where you can really see, where each part of the kick comes in as well. So I think that's quite important these days, especially as sometimes you have to really spend a long time to train your ear when you're using things like Serum. But I think kick 2, you kind of
I mean, it's all laid out pretty easily for you to see, and you can really kind of it's just easy to get the sound that you're looking for and know where things need to go, because it's got all of the nodes have notes marked out, so you can tune it really easily. In this case, it's not. I don't think it's tuned to any particular key. As you can see, it's the envelope goes down all the way. But
otherwise, you'd have to use analyzers to check where the key of the kick is.
Yeah,
it gets a little fiddly.
A lot of the time, there's just there's no point. I mean, because for a tune like this, which is fairly brash, I guess, or for this style, everything's just sidechained so hard. There's less need for tuning stuff, because you're not encountering as many phase problems between your kick and your bass, because it's just ducking completely out of the way. So anyway, for this one, the processing within kick 2, there's very little. No distortion, no EQ, no compression,
no layers, is literally just the pitch envelope. Is how it sounds on its own. So as you can see, pretty basic sounding, but I mean it does the trick. It's the key is really getting these nodes to like sit in the right place, because they can change the sound of the kick pretty drastically just by moving them a tiny bit.
And you also get that visual representation of what it actually looks like when you when you're changing the kick as well.
So, I mean, a lot of the time, it's messing about with these nodes and getting them to sit in the right place for the tune, really. And like I was saying before, this is why it's such an advantage having the actual synth in the tune, because, I mean, you want it to sit in the right place in the mix, and then if there's too much sub in the kick, for example, instead of EQing it out, you can go straight into the kick too, and either make the tail smaller, so it's like more of just the transient, more punchy, or have the like one of the last nodes not so low, so it's not actually. That's like, I mean, you wouldn't use that in a tune,
but you just to see what it sounds like.
High pitch. It's just better doing that from source and then like getting it right, from the beginning, instead of like, a kick sample that we would have used before, where you're trying to like do these crazy EQ curves to like get it sit properly in the tune. It's like,
if you are intent on, and your workflow does involve bouncing out kicks and snares, we would recommend not bouncing them out a little longer than you usually would, because when you want to bring it back into a tune later on, you can shape it a lot better. You obviously can't add more kick or more of a tail to a kick that doesn't have any more tail, so it's better to have them longer so that you can shape them back and chisel them back into what you want them to be.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, the other good thing about kick too is like I always find it hard to be accurate with where the pitch envelope is actually going, but as you can see here, you can be like super accurate with each of the points and get the actual transient part to sound exactly how you want it to sound. So here it's like a pretty extreme. It's all the way from C10, like nearly 20k, and that's where the click is coming from, which I've rolled off slightly with the amp envelope here, because with that,
it sounds a bit overkill,
a bit too much on the transient. So just easily curve that.
And obviously, as you pull that out a bit more, you get a lot more of a deeper kick, and it's not quite so transient. It's not like for the purpose of this set of drums, we're going for something that cuts through quite heavily. Whereas maybe for a deeper kick, you might want to do something like this, where it isn't as quite as clicky.
Yeah. So I mean, the point is, it's just very customizable and suits our needs exactly, really. So yeah, that's about it for the actual synth itself. And like I say, you can use Serum, you can use FM8. Chosen to use this because it's just so intuitive, like with the way that you can shape the drums. And for transients, I mean, you'd only really use it for the actual core part of the drum. You can add layers with these bits here, but I tend not to, because it's just a bit fiddly when you can just, in Bitwig, you can easily add an instrument layer this way. So yeah, in terms of processing on the actual kick itself, some compression going on here, I think, just to bring out without that, the tail was going a bit too hot into this here, so just tamed it a bit with the compression, with still quite a slow attack, but just retains the click a tiny bit. And then this is something we use quite a lot on drums, the VMR, sorry. These just like help give it a kind of analog feel. Like if you drive this, and it can really, you can get some quite cool analog sounding distortion out of it.
The Slate Digital stuff we tend to use for the sound. So something like, Fab Filter, that's a very kind of precision EQ. You want to take out maybe resonant frequencies or whatever, or muddy areas. So you tend to use something like that. And also when you obviously push a frequency, or you shelf something, you don't actually get a tone from it. It's very kind of transparent EQ. Whereas with the Slate Digital stuff, when we use that, we're using it because we want to color the drums, we want to add some flavor.
Yeah, and they obviously each kind of EQ has its uses, but it's knowing when to use them. Like this EQ is really kind of characterful, I guess, and it's quite extreme, and for some things it can be really useful to getting like an interesting tone out of stuff. But if you want to drill out 150 hertz from your kick drum, you'll use Fab Filter
exactly,
Q3 or something like that, because it's just so much more precise. And this has nothing on it. I don't know if that's reset or if that does happen sometimes, but I think it sounds fine without it, so maybe not. So actually, I think there's a bit of a lump going on in the mid range, so I would maybe take that out with some EQ. But again, you could go back and doctor it even more in the actual synth, probably to get rid of that mid range kind of lumpiness. But I don't always do that. I mean, that sounds fun to me. And then, last but certainly not least, some limiting, which will always be at the end of the last stage in all of our, especially our drums, just limiting everything. Normally, to be honest, I'd be like using a bit of trash before this just to drive it, just get a bit even more gain out of it, so it's as loud as it can be. As you can hear, that's hitting a bit harder there, and it looks like bad practice. It looks like there's just such an extreme amount of gain reduction, but it's all about how it sounds, really. And for dance floor tunes, you're really wanting to just get as much gain out of each sound as possible.
Later down the line, when it comes to all these really small kind of approaches to dealing with the dynamics, and later on in the mix, when you get to the master and stuff like that, or you'll start clipping in groups and things like that, you're able to get, if you do it in multiple stages, you're able to get a much louder dynamic sound out of all your elements, rather than trying to smash it through a limiter that's working really, really hard. Like it's just going to ruin your mix.
And the other thing is as well, which related to that, is that if you have a limiter on a group and you've got everything going into it at different levels, if your kick is really loud going into that group stage limiter, that limiter will be turning everything else down when that kick hits. So you really want everything leveled out before you're doing those final stages of limiting. Everything clipped individually, so they're all kind of like nice and level, and that's how we get everything sounding so clean. Like just a little bit, like increments of clipping and limiting and controlling the dynamics in that way.
Yeah.
So I mean that's pretty standard. That's like how not a huge amount on there. But that's more or less how I'd go about doing a kick drum.
I mean, even for a kick like this, where it's just one kick, and the two snares without the second kick. I mean, you could even, if you wanted to, you could maybe even make it just a little bit longer.
Yeah, that for kicks in this pattern, as we've only got one per bar. So I mean, you want it to really have an impact because it's there's less of them, so
there's a lot more space to work with.
Yeah, so normally I'd probably pop a kick. These are our breaks that we use for everything.
Yeah, we'll get onto these later.
Yeah, something like that. Something nice and boomy. So this has just gone into a sampler in a layer alongside the kick, but importantly to note, it is before the actual final dynamic kind of limiting stages of the track. So then we'd shape this a bit so it like sits with the original kick a bit.
Yeah, so the transients aren't overlapping.
Yeah, you don't need the transient for all the transient information is coming from the kick too, which is nice and clean. And then we're just using this as an additional layer for a bit of tone on top of the kick. So here I'm just shaping it with the amp envelope, a bit of attack, so it fades in, something like that. I'd probably also EQ out the low end again, because we're only really needing it for the tone. And then you could put anything you want on there. You could put reverb or something like that, because the core hit and all of the important information that the kick is for is coming from the kick too.
Yeah. Yeah, so we're starting to get a nice acoustic layer on top.
Yeah. Maybe some reverb or something like that. And then if you're adding layers after you've processed the first kick, you might want to watch out for, because you're getting more gain this going into this processing at the end. So you might want to watch these levels a tiny bit so that you're not getting too much distortion. It's all about the fine tuning. So that sounds okay.
It all makes the biggest difference in the end if you really concentrate and focus on all these little nitty gritty things in the beginning. You'll have a much better time at the end, because you won't have to worry about this stuff. Because in the past, what really is a bad habit that you might get into when you're first starting out doing production is that you kind of get lost in the creative process, which is we all do. And then what happens is you just pile all this stuff in. And now you've got a full tune that you've been working on for a week, and now you have to go all the way back and figure out why stuff isn't fitting together.
Yeah. And it's, like I said at the start, this is why it's nice being able to say I'm starting a new project here. I can, in the same way that you'd use a kick sample that you'd made, I can just drag this whole kick channel in here. I probably actually wouldn't do that. I'd drag these two individual instrument layers in. Now that's quite a specific reason, because we've got a kick trigger here, which is connected up to the sidechain channel. But
this is our starting template.
We can go into that a bit more later, and then I'd copy probably across the. But I mean, that's just one of the great things about Bitwig. So looking out for that Bitwig sponsor as always. But yeah, so that's generally why we do that. Oh, okay. So yeah, the kick layer. There is actually a kick layer already in here, but it's in the percussion channel. So that's another way you could do it. But I mean, I generally like doing it on the kick, in the kick channel, because then it's the MIDI information.
Yeah, it stays the same.
Yeah, it's triggering both at the same time instead of having to move the kick and then move this. It just makes more sense.
Snare?
Yeah, snare.